Hello, everyone. Happy holidays. It's been a little while. We experienced a hurricane and I've been displaced. So, as you can see, I'm in a new location, but all is well. Everyone is safe and accounted for. So, I'm excited to be back and to talk to you this week about a film that I saw many years ago, and it left a strong impression on me. It's called The Devil and Daniel Johnston. And so this is a documentary film about a man named Daniel Johnston. And Daniel Johnston is an artist who is uniquely talented. The music that he writes and performs, as well as the art that he draws, is really one of a kind. And what makes this film so unique is the way that his severe and profound mental illness really is where his art is coming from. And it makes for some of the most incredible, just beautiful, unique art. And you really aren't going to find anything else like it. And what's so incredible about Daniel is that as he performs, particularly in his music, he's not a particularly talented guitar player. He's not a particularly talented singer. His music from a technical standpoint is very flawed. And yet it's captivating. It is absolutely captivating to watch him on stage. And the raw emotion and the raw power that he brings to a performance is so refreshing and so captivating. You really just have to see it. But the just a little bit about the film. So it follows the life of Daniel Johnston from when he was very young to present day. And he grew up with parents who were hyper religious, and so he was exposed to those types of concepts and ideologies from a young age, and that will come into play later on as he starts to develop a pretty significant mental illness. And so his parents are loving parents, they're supportive parents, and Daniel is just different. He's just different. He's a little eccentric. He's not totally on board with the religious aspects of his family, and they start to see kind of early on that he's a bit peculiar. And so as the movie progresses, you really start to get a sense of how central music and drawing is to his life. The expression of his kind of psychological torment is evident in the art that he produces. The music is just it's so different, and it kind of hits you, and it's like, I don't know what's going on here, but it just hooks you, and you have to keep listening to it. And his art is the same way. His art is very unique. He has this eye that he draws, which is a continuing theme in the art that he produces, and often his art lines up with his music. So the lyrics and the emotion of a particular piece of music is really embodied in his art. So Daniel goes off to college, but before that he falls in love with a woman named Laurie. And Laurie is to become really his lifelong obsession. And although the love was never consummated, so to speak, Laurie is kind of his muse. She's his source of inspiration, his pain, his love. And so he talks about her quite a bit and references her quite a bit in his art. But he goes off to college, and this is where we start to kind of see the emergence of his mental illness, and it really starts to interfere with his ability to thrive and his ability to function. You start to see some pretty severe depressive episodes. You also see episodes of mania, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And you start to see it really come out in his music. There's a particular song called I Had Lost My Mind, and I'll play it for you now. And it's a beautiful song, and it just kind of gives you a little bit of insight into his mind. And it's just such a divergence from your quote unquote normal thought patterns and thought processes. And so it really is it's very, very fascinating. Daniel starts to show signs of some type of psychotic disorder. And when we think about psychosis, fundamentally we think about being out of contact with reality. This can manifest in delusions, which are strongly held fixed beliefs that are not in contact with reality. They usually have themes, and for Daniel, his theme is religiosity. So kind of his ongoing battle with the devil and demons and Satan, and this is a real strong theme and something that people often see him going off on in these kind of manic episodes, and people become really concerned about him. And they don't talk a lot about perceptual disturbances or hallucinations. They do kind of touch on it a little bit. So he's got this psychotic component, but he's also got the mood disorder. So a mood disorder is what you would call a bipolar or a type of depression. And Daniel cycles. So he goes from being really low to really high. So the really high is what we call mania, or just below that would be called hypomania. So mania is often a psychotic state where someone is driven by a motor. It's often euphoric for the person. There's often really kind of outrageous behaviors, impulsivity, being hyperverbal, just really, really kind of hyperactive to the extreme. And then he'll have these depressive episodes where he's suicidal, where he cannot function because his depression is so significant. And so you start to see, as his music career starts to take off and he starts to get some publicity and a bit of an audience, he just can't seem to cope effectively with his mental illness. They really don't talk a lot about treatment, although he does go to mental hospitals at various points throughout the film, and he's put on some pretty strong antipsychotic medications. They mention Haldol, and one of the downsides of these medications, while they can be effective for what we call positive symptoms, so the addition of symptoms such as hallucinations, a lot of the thought disorders, disordered thinking, they have a lot of side effects: weight gain, lethargy, just really being kind of really flat. And this is not a very appealing state to be in. So oftentimes people don't adhere to their prescribed medications, and their symptoms get worse. And so Daniel does that at many points throughout the film. He will start the medication and then he'll get really flat and just, it's not a place he wants to be. So then he'll come off of it. And this is also tied to his creative expression. So his mental illness and the activation of his psychosis is really tied into his creative expression. And without it, I think he's hindered as to what he can do creatively. So there's this interrelationship between his insanity and his creativity. And so finding that balance can be difficult. Another important aspect of the film is the interviews with his parents, and you really get a sense of how Daniel's mental illness affects the family. There's a particular scene where they're interviewing the father, who's kind of an older man. You get the sense he's a religious, conservative man, and he's just sobbing. He's just sobbing because of the pain that he's in from seeing his son suffer the way that he does in the film. And at one point, he's acting as if Daniel is gone, that he's lost his son. And this is really important to understand when you're dealing with mental illness, is the impact that it can have on the family. And Daniel actually continued to live with his family, so they were in pretty close proximity to his behaviors throughout his life. There's another profound moment in the film where his father goes and kind of rescues Daniel during one of his psychotic episodes, and his father's a pilot, so he takes in his airplane, and Daniel kind of loses contact with reality in the plane and actually takes over the steering and crashes the plane. Fortunately, there was no major injuries, but it's just kind of like, it's one of these things, wow, this can be really dangerous if someone isn't receiving treatment. And so the film flashes to Daniel's past and Daniel's present, and you see kind of where he is now, living with his family, continuing to produce music. And unfortunately, Daniel passed away a few years ago. But you get the sense that later in his life, he found a sense of stability. He learned ways to cope with his illness. He learned ways to be part of his family, although it was not what you would consider to be normal. It was a place for them that seemed to work. So it's an excellent film, very well done. You get exposure to a lot of his art, a lot of his music, and I strongly recommend it. And so I want to talk a little bit about his illness. So there's different, I guess, opinions or interpretations about what it is that Daniel is suffering from. And really there's three possible kind of diagnoses, roughly speaking, with Daniel. The first one would be what's called bipolar with psychotic features. Bipolar 1 with psychotic features. And so bipolar is essentially a combination of mania and depressive episodes. Typically the manic episodes last for at least 4 days, and then the depressive episodes are about 2 weeks. And so there's really drastic kind of cycles of mood. And I talked a little bit about mania, and you get a sense of it in the film where he's just wide open. I mean, he's just, at one point he's up on the stage and he's ranting on about Satan and fighting the devil, and you get to observe what mania looks like, and it is painfully obvious. It is nearly impossible to see someone in a manic state and not recognize that something is very, very wrong. And then he would swing down to the other end. But when he was in his manic state, he was certainly psychotic, convinced that the devil was after him, and just a lot of thought problems. You hear what's called word salad, where he's just kind of incoherently going through these very tangential thoughts that don't necessarily connect. So bipolar with psychotic features. The second is what we would call schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder that is characterized by either delusions and or perceptual disturbances, such as visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, where you're feeling things that aren't there. And then, of course, the delusions are these strongly held fixed beliefs that are not in contact with reality. Another component of schizophrenia is the thought disorder. So oftentimes folks have problems with their thought process, right? They can't complete thoughts in a reasonable way. They seem to be very tangential, so they'll just go off on these pathways that are very divergent from the topic at hand. Sometimes they'll come back, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they have word salad, where they're just kind of speaking very incoherently. So this can obviously make it very difficult for them to function. But with schizophrenia, kind of classic schizophrenia, there is not a mood component. So you do not see the major fluctuations in mood, which you definitely see in Daniel. So the third possibility is what's called schizoaffective disorder. And schizoaffective disorder is essentially a combination of bipolar and schizophrenia. And in my view, this is what fits Daniel the best, because bipolar with psychotic features, this doesn't really fit for me, because Daniel really shows more of the schizophrenic kind of symptoms, particularly with the thought disorder. It's also his kind of psychosis. His thought disorder is stable, it's chronic. So it's not like he goes in and out of periods of being lucid, and really it's kind of, this is a part of his personality, so to speak, whereas you don't see that with bipolar with psychotic features. They'll go up into a manic psychotic state and they'll come out of it. And so with Daniel, there seems to be a pretty consistent, stable presence of his psychosis. And so with schizoaffective disorder, you have that schizophrenia piece, but you also have a mood disorder. So in my view, Daniel clearly has both. And so I would put him in the schizoaffective category. This is not explicitly mentioned in the film. They mention bipolar in the film. So he may have very well been evaluated by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with that. You know, obviously, I never met Daniel, so I can't argue with that. I can just go based on what I saw in the film. But it's really a compelling documentary that you really feel for him. I mean, it's hard not to watch him and just get pulled in. I mean, it's the best way for me to describe it. It just kind of pulls you in. It's hard not to have empathy for Daniel, and to see how beautiful and debilitating these conditions can be. So let's talk for a minute about treatment, right? So how to effectively address someone with a schizoaffective disorder. So it's really going to be a combination of services and support for the individual. So it's going to include psychotherapeutic pharmacologic and psychosocial interventions. So it's going to be a mix of medications, a mix of therapy, and a mix of kind of wrap around services, if you will, to address vocational needs, skills training, case management, crisis intervention, all things that can sometimes be necessary for someone living with schizoaffective disorder. So starting with the psychotherapies, typically a traditional cognitive behavioral approach to help someone manage their delusions, their hallucinations, learn how to change the relationship to these things, and find perhaps some acceptance strategies as well as some useful coping skills to manage any of the mood symptoms. So you would kind of apply a similar approach as you would someone with a mood disorder. So someone with a depression, you might teach them about values, and you might teach them about how to clarify those values in their life. You might teach them about committed action. You might teach them how to reframe certain thoughts that are disturbing or that aren't helpful. So those types of things would be appropriate from a therapy standpoint, as well as including the family. So as we saw in the film, Daniel lived with his parents, and they were an integral part of his life and his support. So really giving them the education, giving them the support that they need to not only manage their self-care, but for them to be of maximum benefit to Daniel. So those are some examples of some therapeutic approaches. When we talk about medications, I'm not a physician, so I can speak broadly to these things, but with someone that has a psychotic and a mood component to their disorder, there could be distinct pharmacological interventions for both. So for the hallucinations and delusions, they might use antipsychotic medications. They mentioned Haldol in the film. This is an older antipsychotic medication that has a lot of those unpleasant side effects, such as being flat, numb. And so there are some newer medications, Risperdal being one of them, and other atypical antipsychotics like Abilify, Latuda. These medicines they have a little bit of a better side effect profile, but still can sometimes come with weight gain, lethargy, things of that nature. So sometimes it's about finding the right fit. And then there would be medications to address the mood component. So for mood instability, there would be mood stabilizers such as lithium or Lamictal. And these can be very effective, one for addressing mania, one for depression. So the Lamictal is actually really effective at bringing someone out of a depressive state and preventing depressive episodes. Not as great for the mania component, whereas lithium, its strength is being able to address the manic episodes. So these two brands of medications are often used. Sometimes antidepressant medications like SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There is some research that shows that for people with a bipolar, cyclical depression, that the antidepressant may actually exacerbate those symptoms, particularly inducing mania. So those are sometimes used with caution. And then finally, you have what we would call psychosocial interventions, and these are more about addressing the lifestyle components, getting them connected to the right services, whether it's working through disability, insurance, housing, any vocational needs that they may have, getting them connected to treatment, transportation, all of the things that would go along with supporting someone's clinical treatment. Because oftentimes these disorders, such as schizoaffective disorder, although they exist on a continuum, they can be debilitating, right? And it's difficult for the person to be able to complete, aspects of their daily functioning. And so having that support is really going to mitigate some of the risk factors that are associated with this illness. So those are the main three things: the pharmacologic, psychotherapeutic, and psychosocial interventions that would be indicated for someone with schizoaffective disorder. It's a great film. I think really have a lot of empathy for Daniel, and I think his body of work is just incredible, and would encourage you to not only see the film, but to check out his music, check out his art. It's really inspirational. So thank you all for joining. As always, keep your minds open and your screens lit.